Welcome, Reanimated fans, and happy holidays for whatever holidays you celebrate. I am H.A. Conrad, coming to you from Brooklyn, and as always, joined by my intrepid co-host, Stuart Tiffin. Hello, Stuart.
Hail, happy Saturnalia.
Yeah, you're coming from the West Coast, where it's a lot more balmy, which is good. So feeling fortunate that we're not sort of dealing with some of the catastrophes that are going on in the rest of the country.
Yeah, my heart really goes out to everybody trapped in these terrible winter storm conditions. It
Yeah.
seems really rough.
So I hope everybody is warm and digs out soon. If you're dealing with that, and hopefully heading into the new year on a high note. But we are going to be chatting about episodes 5 and 6 of Interview with the Vampire series. But we usually talk about news, but I think just due to the holidays, there is a dearth of news, so we will be skipping over that part for now and just hopping into our review summaries of these episodes. The first is A Vile Hunger for Your Hammering Heart. And that, that sort of picks up where we left off the last episode, where we saw that Claudia is clearly dealing with some severe PTSD, trauma, a variety of things, growing pains, vampire growing pains. So ready to hop into it, Stuart?
Yeah, let's do this. These were fun episodes. I enjoyed
They
these.
were. They were. And I have to say, again, just cannot. I think that this cast is really strong and they have great chemistry together. And I think that the tension between Louis, Lestat, and Claudia is just masterfully done and really just a testament to the skills of these actors. So I really hope that they end up in other things. If this doesn't sort of continue, I think there's a possibility it might, based on where we are in the story anyway. Um, but anyway, this episode was really just delightful in my opinion. Just a lot of stuff going on where basically Claudia has gone completely off the rails, and it's also like they really walk the line. And maybe I'm just a dark person, but the dark comedy of this episode I thought was just so well done.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, to me, it's just very much in keeping with some of the things that, even in the book about Claudia that they you know talk about, but obviously with a different twist because she's a bit older. But still, I thought that I don't want to say the montage scenes, but they are kind of murder montage scenes with Claudia were really just excellent.
Oh,
And
and the home search was just
yes,
like one laugh after another. And I do
I know.
think
And
it's almost like it was humor written for a vampire. Like a vampire would
that's
find this
exactly what
amusing, right?
that's exactly what it was. And it's just like she's got, she's basically been murdering people and, taking souvenirs, and she's got them hidden in the house, and the police are coming to search, and she's like trying to hide body parts in places. And I'm trying not to laugh, but it is, I mean, it's just really well done. And the Claudia is just hilarious, but also Lestat's reaction to it is really great. I mean, at least Louis is, you know, upset about it, but Lestat is actually somewhat like admiring in a strange way. So, although he's upset, obviously, with the repercussions, but um, there is just this great like comical sort of like how it all unfolds in these scenes. I thought was excellent. So
This episode also begins with a scene from Dubai where Malloy is reading from Claudia's diary, where she's been recording the last words of her victims on like 40 something pages of her diary. And he's
mhm.
reading them out loud while Louis is feeding on Rashid,
Yep.
which raises a big question after the next episode we're talking about today. And Rashid is like looking pretty happy about getting fed on, but
Yep.
also not really being taken down a peg the way Damek was. Like he
Nope.
doesn't seem dizzy when he gets up. He just kind of gets up and walks away. And Louis is feeding on him
For a
for
while.
a while. Yeah. So I thought that that was an interesting scene to start the episode,
Yep.
before they jump into the and this realization that she's killed 56 people while Louis and Lestat thought that she was just sulking in her coffin. She's
Right.
been off the rails.
Yeah. off the rails, and then not doing such a great job at hiding them. She just kind of like leaves them in this area, which is what brings like the police to their door eventually, which is that, they're, yeah, basically they're in a flood zone, and she's left all the bodies in a place where they are easily discoverable once the water comes up. And Louis, who has lived there all of his life, fully understands that in a way that I think, uh, like Claudia doesn't have enough sort of knowledge of this, but he's just like, really? Like you're gonna leave it in the place where they can be uncovered really easily. So, but it makes kind of sense because she isn't physically big. And she kind of has to be in a spot where she could easily um sort of hide them, and this is sort of the easiest, but she does it much like a kid would do, right? Like she isn't thinking too much beyond the moments where she's just like taking them out, getting their
Yeah.
thoughts, recording them and things like that. Like she's quite impulsive. So I
How
thought that
about
this was excellent.
it
Just
was it was a lot of fun to watch. The scene where they go to the bar to meet with what's I feel like that guy's name is Anderson.
yeah.
He was like just a muckety muck. Now he's running for Congress.
Mm-hmm.
What what was your takeaway from this scene? He reveals that he wants them to support his campaign financially.
Mm-hmm.
He reveals also that he knows that they are going to be
Searched.
the searched because of the 56 disappeared people who all are, or many of them are from the French Quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And then so Louis goes and hypnotizes the police commissioner or police chief, and Lestat hypnotizes, I'm going to call him Anderson because I don't remember his name, and then gives him a little cross on his cheek with his fingernail. What do you feel like was going on in this scene? Because I was a little like, why did they have to hypnotize them?
Yeah, I think just to give them time to get out, because I think that the idea was that they were going to hold them there for a little bit until they conducted the search while they were not home. But the things that bother me about this show is just that they do have all these powers, and sometimes it feels like they use them, and sometimes it feels like they don't. So I kind of feel like the minute they found out their house was like, why even do you need to do that? Because since Lestat can just kind of stop time or make people think that time is stopped,
Mm.
right? Like, why even bother? The minute you hear it, get out. But maybe they wanted to know his motivations a little bit more. Same thing when the police are searching their house. It just seems a little odd.
They totally just let them do it. They don't, they,
Right. Like it
yeah.
just is, it's like, why even bother? There's not that many of them, or there's three of you who have like insane powers, maybe because it'll bring more attention. But at this point, you're kind of already burned, right?
This
Like,
was the first time we got to see Louis use hypnotism powers
right,
on
right.
the police chief. I don't think we'd ever seen that before. And we don't
No,
know if Claudia can actually even do that.
right. So yeah, so that's the only part that I sometimes am a little, not that I'm confused by it, but it doesn't feel like they use it consistently.
Hmm.
Um, and they aren't giving you enough of an explanation about why they might not use them, which is, maybe they get burned out if they use them too much, or maybe if there's too many people paying attention, they can't do it or something like that. But it just feels like that doesn't make any sense given how many people were at the other place at the bar. Or wherever they were.
Yeah.
Like I just felt like there
It
was
was a
enough of them.
speakeasy, wasn't it? That was the point. It was
Speakeasy,
like a
yeah,
speakeasy during Prohibition.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I just and again, these are people that are not really, or not even people, these are vampires, so they're not really restrained by a lot of the same things that would restrain normal humans. So they are fully capable of going and disappearing and not ever or leaving enough time to have it pass where nobody would even remember. They could also take some space and honestly just murder everybody that knows anything about what's happening, right? Um, so that's the part of the story that I'm not fully jiving with, but it's fine. I'm not going to get too far into that. I still am really enjoying the whole thing, and I enjoyed how this all came to pass in their confrontation with Claudia.
Well, it
And
certainly becomes a confrontation, and Lestat basically
right,
rejects her in this scene. Now
yep,
he's completely over her as an
yep,
experiment,
yep.
and she decides to move out. And I thought that this was a really interesting addition to this story. She is a teenager, right? And And
Yeah.
so she's like, screw you guys, I'm gonna go out and do it my way, and I don't need you.
Yep.
um and she heads out, and there was some great lines in this episode, and the one that I liked here was, we were just a simmering pot of resentments. There was no roaring 20 for us. We would
Yep.
be underground for 7 years. And then they there is a time jump to see, that their townhouse is kind of devolved into
Right.
just a hoarder house. There's a raccoon in the hallway. Louis
Right.
has
And
just got his own couch, like with piles of books on either side of it. I just thought that there was some great, like
well, I
they
mean,
set it up with those great lines, and then they had that amazing set dressing too for
yeah.
the scene.
And this, I guess, is the equivalent of a vampire in depression or something
Yeah,
like that.
7 years
Like,
of depression.
but this is my point is that maybe it's just that they couldn't, from a mental point of view, and I'm sure Louis wanted to stay there in case Claudia came back. But it's not like they had to live like this. It's not like they were totally bound to New Orleans. They could have gone anywhere, but I guess he wanted to probably stay there just in case Claudia returned. And then and and he kept sort of sending thoughts out to her and to get her to come home, and she would not, but
Mhm.
other people could obviously, or other vampires could obviously hear it, as we found. And the relationship between Louis and Lestat is just even more broken down. Like there's no kind of they just hate each other, or Louis definitely hates Lestat. um and I think that one of the things that's really powerful about this whole thing is the idea of Claudia out in the world on her own without any sort of protection, without, because she is like basically a kid vampire. And she doesn't really know anything about the world, despite how quote unquote old she is in real time. And we do see what she's been doing. She basically has been it's kind of funny how they do it, but she's kind of been going to college basically. um
Mhm. Not
and
taking classes though, but just go to the library.
yeah, just going to the library. And then we finally in this scene see, or in this episode, see another vampire outside of their little circle, named Bruce. And they do pull a little bit of a switcheroo here where he seems as if he's actually on her side, but turns out to be um pretty horrible, and she's quite vulnerable. And we don't know exactly what happens to her in this particular scenario because Louis will definitely not talk about it, even though Daniel Malloy really tries to get him to talk about it. So that is,
I
you
think
know,
we all can
I think
can
we
kind
can all
of,
surmise, but it's
yeah.
just interesting that he's just so like it to me it's very clear, to everybody it's very clear, but he just cannot even talk about what happened to her. And
It goes
um
to the point with what he does to Daniel is really uh not great either. Like he like exacerbates his Parkinson's,
mhm.
and he isn't even pushing that hard, I would say. Malloy can be pretty rude, but I don't feel like he'd even gotten to his rudest, before Louis is like just afflicting him. Um,
Yeah, and it's interesting because he's been, maybe it's just that he's trying to tell his own narration, and he has clearly very specific boundaries, but there's parts where he's very open about things. So this is clearly a no-go zone, but um I agree with you. I didn't think that Malloy was really overstepping that much, any more than he has earlier that we have seen, and any more than Louis would probably expect from him,
yeah,
knowing who he is. But it's a very instant reaction, so I guess you can kind of surmise how strongly Louis feels about this, and guilty he feels actually. So but in this case we get a few pieces of information, which is that there are other vampires out there. They're
hmm
very different apparently than how Lestat and Louis are. It seems like they're a little bit more predators, and have different.
yeah, at multiple levels. And
Yep.
Bruce's origin story is quite interesting. Like he was made in Copenhagen
Hmm.
and then came home, and where he thinks he thought he was the only vampire until he heard Louis calling for Claudia. I thought that was kind of an interesting
Yep.
detail.
And then obviously he does whatever he does to Claudia, but he can hear other vampires. He's been hearing Louis, which is in some part, maybe part of how he found her. But it's, so I thought that that was kind of an interesting thing. And then, um, Claudia's return. is
Oh, before we get to her return, I would also just like to touch on after he dials up Malloy's Parkinson's, Rashid comes into the room and is saying Louis would like to apologize, or Mr. Dulac would like to apologize, or he apologizes. He's speaking for
yeah,
Louis.
it's really weird.
It this scene based on the end of the next episode makes more sense to me now, where he is asserting, like, Rashid, who is 20 something. Louis
Mhm.
even says, "You're 20 something. What do you think about XY?" Uh, he's being very assertive, and he has been kind of throughout the whole series, other than the fact that once in a while Louis has dismissed him out of the room by saying, "Rashid, you're lurking," or something along those lines.
Mhm.
So it's just Rashid is a very curious character and becoming more so.
He
And so
is,
I
and
thought,
I do like how you don't, not that you don't pay as much attention to him, but he doesn't seem quite as important. And now he's sort of coming more into focus for the audience. So I think that it's pretty clever how they do this.
yeah, I agree.
um, and start to magnify his importance, because they definitely play up the fact that he's quote unquote just a lackey, at least in Daniel Malloy's eye. But Daniel is very interested in him for a
He calls him
variety.
a rent boy in this
Yeah,
episode.
yeah, yeah. And so I really enjoy how they developed his particular character, and you see a lot more of him. Um, but and the other thing I was going to say is that one of the purposes of Claudia, quote unquote, going to college is that she wants to find out information about vampirism, any folklore, any information, because both she and Louis both feel as if they are completely in the dark about a lot of the info. Like they feel like Lestat has been hiding a lot of things. Every once in a while, they'll get a little drip of information, but both feel that there is a lot more possibly. So she's
Yeah,
been gathering all this information. That was her purpose of like going to these libraries and things
that
like that.
was fascinating. We also have a scene here before she comes back and reveals everything she's learned and her plan to go to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
She follows Louis, and it turns out she's been following Louis and Lestat. She's been back in town for a little while, it seems like.
Yeah.
And she's followed Louis to a cemetery meeting that he's having with his sister Grace again. And as most of his family meetings go, this one also goes quite
Poorly.
unpleasantly. She has basically inscribed his name on a gravestone in the
Mhm.
cemetery. Says that he died in 1930. I don't know what year it's supposed to be in this scene. We do get to 1937 in the next episode. And she's like, we got our savings got wiped out in the stock market crash, and we're going to Boston, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and then they're like, then they just leave, and she's like, "You're not my brother," and whatever. And it's like Louis is obviously wrecked. This is his last connection,
Hmm.
personal, like relative connection
The
to the
world. Yeah.
city and to maybe to the way. But she's not dead, like, so she might still bounce back. But I imagine we might next see her as a grandma or something.
Maybe. But Claudia realizes that she's basically a surrogate for his sister, that he misses his sister, and that's part of why he did what he did, which I think is semi-true, not completely true, but this is something he's never shared with her. So I thought that that was interesting that she kind of takes what she does from this particular scene.
Yeah,
Um,
but which is what kind of encourages her to come back also, because
right.
she realizes she feels like she is defined by Louis and Lestat, even if she, well, no, less so by Lestat, but like not being with them, she finds, I think, a little bit difficult. And so she does return. Louis just gets up and gives her a big hug. Lestat is like, "Ooh, the
He's
prodigal
not
daughter."
quite he's not quite as happy. So
So she reveals all the things she's learned. She talks about the places she wants to go. Lestat's just like, "Those vampires will tear you to pieces." And she's like, "Why?" Yeah, that's where she's like, "You're not telling us everything. Tell us what you know." And instead, he just kind of, and then she says to Louis, like, "Let's go. We don't need him. We can go." And Lestat flies into a rage and attacks her first. Louis defends her, and then a huge fight breaks out.
yeah, and this is, I mean, this is incredibly hard to watch and incredibly violent, and it's really awful.
It's
And the
mostly from her perspective, which I thought was quite interesting. And she's not
Yeah.
involved in most of the fight. She's been attacked. She is injured,
Mhm.
but she's mostly just crying and like cowering while you hear. most of the fight happening. And every so often, Louis and Lestat come through a wall or a ceiling or a floor, right? I thought that was really cool.
Well, and it's also invoking this like very much a domestic violence
Yeah.
piece, like and through the eyes of like a kid watching this happen with her parents. And you even hear Louis saying things like, "Oh, it's okay, Claudia," and like, "Oh, don't worry about it," as he's clearly being just destroyed by Lestat.
Yeah.
And it takes it so above and beyond because they're vampires. So obviously the limitations that human bodies would have. They still do have limitations, as we find out, but not quite to the same extent that humans have. They can be hurt, but they and they can heal from that, but it takes a long time. It's still depending on the strength of the vampire, they can be injured pretty horribly, as we've seen. And then the big reveal in this whole scene is that Lestat actually can fly.
Or
Uh,
hover. I don't know.
Hover, whatever you might want to call it.
But he hovers up to like 3,000 feet, it feels like here
Mhm.
with Louis after he's beaten the hell out of Louis. Louis doesn't have much left in him.
Yeah.
And he says, there's more like great one liners here. It's like, I've been waiting so long for you to love me so patiently. Let me
Mhm.
hear you say that let me hear you say, I'm never going to love you. That would really help me out.
Mhm.
I think Sam Reed, the guy playing Lestat, sometimes I feel like he kind of over
He
delivers,
does. He
but
does
it's
over
just,
do it a little bit,
it
but
also just feels like what Lestat would be like kind of
yeah,
over dramatic.
because he is. He's annoyingly overly dramatic, and that's even his character in the book. So I do
And
think
yeah,
that's probably on brand, right?
yeah, it's I'm this performance, these two guys, and Bailey Bass playing Claudia, just like you said at the beginning, so good, so much fun to watch these three, and they're obviously being given good dialogue, and the story is spinning in directions that are unexpected to people who are somewhat familiar with the narrative that we from the
Mhm.
book. So altogether, this episode is just yeah, it's a lot of fun. And the next one also spins off in new directions too. And a lot of this is because of the time zone or the time period.
Mhm.
We're getting into the 30s. In the next episode, we get into World War II. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. But long story short, Louis gets dropped to like 3,000 feet and is a broken person. And Lestat does not return. And the episode kind of just ends with like happy sounding guitar music,
Yeah.
Claudia looking at Louis' broken body in the courtyard of their house.
And so then it hops into, it leaves it's a pretty dark note. And then the other thing I do want to comment on, and this is again, this has been evident throughout the whole series, the cinematography, the edits, the choreography, especially with like the scenes, is really impeccably done. And even how they're portraying, Claudia with Bruce, what they're showing and what they're not showing, is just it's this is a really well done series. So, and jumping into the next episode, which is, we went from like having this like fireworks of a like fight scene, just everything coming to a complete head between Louis, Lestat, and Claudia, and then going into this next scene. And again, the theme of domestic violence is absolutely there.
Oh God, yeah.
And so you've got Louis and Claudia basically, Lestat's gone. And this episode is like angels put in hell by God. Um, and these, and it basically this is sort of the not healing scenes, but Claudia is helping Louis recover. He's
It's
very
totally
much
his rehab is chasing a baby goat around the
wrecked. And
house
then the goat to make sure he's strong enough to get prey. It's like, oh God.
and then throwing the cards into the hat. I thought there were three like really cool little
Yeah,
scenes about his like recovery and her how she is enabling him. And I thought that
right.
those were great. And it really does like these are happy scenes, even though he's like broken and recovering, they are happy together. And it
Mm-hmm.
really makes you realize later when Lestat shows up again, like what an unwelcome presence he is in their dynamic.
Well, an unwelcome and feared presence.
Yeah.
He has showed his hand. He has showed what he is capable of, despite the fact of how much he says he loves Louis. The things that he did to Louis, that is not something. The tension there that is always going to be there is kind of hard to miss. The only sort of difference is that the time element, is there, and he basically kind of says it at what like that he can wait forever and whatever. Like it's really an interesting dynamic because he just keeps showing up and I mean we're talking about like they talk about years going
Yeah,
by.
at least 3 years.
Um,
Um,
and
yeah.
he shows up with like presents, like a car,
Oh, it's
and
6 years actually. Yeah, like
yeah,
they show some scenes. Like he comes to the door with a book, and Louis throws his coffin out the window, and then 3 years later he gives them a car, which they reject, and then 3 years after that, he comes with the record. He makes an album for Louis, but
right,
has Antoinette sing the vocals, which is just enough to have Louis like react, which is
yeah.
probably what he was looking to
What is
do,
it?
get a rise out of him. And I thought that was an interesting scene there too.
Yeah,
And I did like also that we had a scene in Dubai with Malloy and Louis saying like, "Wait, so he can fly?" And so Louis goes into the cloud gift and how it's rare, et cetera, et
mhm,
cetera. And some people get it. There is just this insane power imbalance though between Lestat and the others.
right.
But yeah, so after 6 years, Louis goes to Lestat. Really, I mean, not not without like a lot of impetus. And then that kind of opens the door. We do have that interesting scene with them saying, "All right, these are the 6 rules." Lestat seems contrite
Right.
and tells them some background about Magnus, which does feel straight out of the lore.
Well, and that's also from Vampire Lestat. Like that was not from Interview with the Vampire. They know nothing about
Yeah,
his like maybe he hints at it, but this is the story that he tells in Vampire Lestat, and this is, you know, the story that eventually, at least in the book series, gets him some amount of sympathy from Louis because he didn't understand that that was sort of the circumstances and under which Lestat was made. And so, you know, so I do think that it makes sense for him to sort of share a little bit here. And this is where they're torquing a little bit of the story, but I get why they do it. And this makes sense to me, especially given how much they've changed with the Claudia storyline. But you know, Lestat is Lestat, and one of the things that they talk about is that um he has to kill Antoinette, who is his singer human lover. And he's like, oh, and they basically just keep saying it, but he never says anything, yay or nay, right? And obviously he does not kill her.
well, he does bring them a newspaper article that says that she's died in a fire and a finger with a
Right.
ring of hers. It's actually her finger,
Yeah.
but it is she's yeah. He never killed her, and the real injustice here before we even get to him being terrible again later, a domestic abuser, is that he asks for his own rule, which is that they all hunt humans. And
Yep.
Louis goes with it. He goes for it, mostly because I think Claudia also says that it feels like it's a judgment on them by him. And so
Yeah.
I think that's what pushes him to hunt humans again. They don't spend a lot of time, they don't dwell on it. They just show him following a guy, right? Like
Yeah.
right after they have the conversation. So he
Right.
is like, okay, I'm doing it. I can do this for the family. And he is the compromiser in this
Yeah.
episode. She's not compromising. Lestat, it turns out, is only pretending to.
Yeah.
And it is just a tableau of domestic abuse and the patterns that can follow with those sort
Right.
of terrible situations.
And you know, I do think that even in his you know, his kid not Lestat, I wouldn't call it a confession, but in his sharing information about how he was made, um it still doesn't explain all of his powers. But you
No.
know, he does try to excuse some of his own behavior by saying, you know, this is why I'm so lonely and hate being lonely and I don't like being abandoned because I was so lonely and had to figure out all this stuff by myself, which is interesting considering how much he has withheld from them. Because he certainly has not been exactly a great teacher in terms of the things. I mean, he did a little bit when Louis first turned into a vampire. Remember, he was trying to sort of give him some pointers, but he did it in a very perfunctory way, like, okay, this is what you do, don't drink till the end and whatever. But I guess in his mind, he felt like this was a much more caring way to teach how, you know, to teach about what they were. But you know, and certainly more from what he says than he ever got. But he's not exactly, you know, a caring and loving teacher in general, and he definitely uses knowledge and withholds knowledge to hold power over them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Louis is even rationalizing that in the distant future, right? With in Dubai, he's like, when Malloy's like, "Why do you think he didn't tell you that he could fly?" And Louis is like, "Well, I guess he didn't want us to have a power imbalance, and it would have made our love more difficult, or something along those lines." It feels
which
like
is
such,
weird, which seems really strange given that he never seems to have a problem with that otherwise, right?
yeah,
so, so yeah, I think that's somebody sugarcoating something.
yeah,
Um, However, the one part of this where they do try to have a more equal family dynamic is that they're calling Claudia sister versus daughter, or niece. And I do think that this is, but Claudia and they also say no secrets, but Claudia and Louis actually are still talking to each other, and she's saying some very like subversive things. She is clearly much more unhappy about this whole situation and feels very trapped.
yeah.
And the re-entry of Lestat into this little triumvirate is definitely much more painful for her than Louis. Although Louis acknowledges that his relationship is not healthy, but he's still very much, he seems, there's a lot of tension, but he seems much happier than Claudia, and he still has a lot more agency than Claudia does in this whole dynamic. So,
Certainly by the end of this episode, we
yep.
realize she has no agency.
No.
The scene of like, so Lestat excuses himself to go hunt alone one evening, and turns out he just goes to Ponchatoula to shack up with Antoinette. And it was nice to see he's just there griping about Louis and Claudia and how, they're ticking him off.
Yeah.
And, pan to outside on the balcony, and there are Louis and Claudia just listening in, and then walking home. I thought that was a really interesting scene. He's where Louis is just like,
Mm-hmm.
look, he's all kinds of messed up, but there's no point in trying to do anything. Like, what's the point? It's
Right.
so fatalistic.
Right.
I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that there's some acknowledgement by Louis that, and that this plays into sort of what happens in the next piece of this, where he gets the position that Claudia is in, and, as much as it would hurt him, wants her to do her own thing and find her freedom, and get out from under the thumb of Lestat. But it's kind of interesting to me what plays out here, but I guess Lestat's interest is more about like he doesn't really, or at least he does not purport to care about Claudia that much, except how it affects how Louis is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I find that to be kind of interesting because basically Louis sort of, I don't want to say he sets her free, but there is a lot, she basically says all these things to him in her head that they're basically enslaved to him, that she thinks that this is what's happened with that Magnus had enslaved Lestat. And so that's why, and that he probably killed him, and then he did this to them. And there's like a lot of things that she's drawing a lot of conclusions about, but she does say that this is how she feels, that she has no power, that she's just kept here.
Yeah,
And it
I thought that
does.
was a really interesting. That was their first chess game of this episode when she's saying those things in her head to Louis.
Right.
Um, and she says one of them out loud to Lestat, that basically he's being terrible to her. He's making fun of her for being bad at chess, and she's like, "Well, my master only taught me enough chess so that to I could take up
Right.
time," or something along those lines, not to be an equal partner, which is, a great metaphor for their entire relationship.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and then internally to Louis, she's making all those other parallels. I thought both of the chess scenes in this episode were really fun.
Yep.
I mean, fun in quotes, like interesting, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, she makes up her mind to leave, and she's trying to get Louis to come with her, but he says to her, "You don't need me." He's really in a dark place. I feel like Louis.
Yep.
You say that he's happy, but I feel like it's not a happiness like I recognize.
It's a fake happiness. I mean,
Yeah.
he feels trapped too, not in the same way, but I think he feels trapped in his emotions. And I mean, while he is doing what he said he would do to hunt humans, that has always been a point of contention for him. He does not feel like that is he does not feel good about that, and never and really does, um so I feel like maybe he is living and he's trapped, but he doesn't want to tell Claudia that. But he's still, I mean, look, he's still pretty involved with Lestat. And again, I think the parallels to like an abusive relationship could be drawn in a, here where he does not feel like he has the agency to get out of it. And but he does feel like he can help get Claudia out of it to some extent.
Yeah, it's just that
So,
cycle of him coming
yep,
back and being so contrite to now
yep.
openly mocking Claudia again. He's not being cruel to Louis, but
No,
that's that
but he
it
is kind of, because the
yeah,
one thing that really pushed Louis' buttons was about Antoinette, and
right.
he very much ignored that.
And
And
Louis is like, he wanted us to find him
yeah,
also.
he
Like,
totally did.
yeah, it's so the patterns are all reemerging. And by that second, well, I guess the second chess match happens after Claudia tries to escape by train. I would love to know how Lestat had tracked her down.
Yes.
Um, I thought that was an interesting like reveal because the first time we see her, it looks like she's getting away.
Yep.
She's even giggling to herself. She's so happy, and we're like, "Oh, good for you, Claudia." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Wow, how's this story going to go from here?" She's like,
Yeah.
and she's disappearing again.
Yep.
But then Lestat shows up and really threatens her. And the dog with the scene where he's got the dog licking the blood from his hand, and then
Yep.
says, "Back in your cage, girl." I
Mm-hmm.
think is what he even says, and he's looking at Claudia.
Claudia.
Oh God. I mean, it's not like subtle, but it was still very effective.
Mm-hmm. And then he
Yeah.
even, and it's again, it's so manipulative. It's such like not even all that subtle play, but it is. Just, even how he reveals that Claudia is back to Louis when Louis thought that she had escaped. And Louis is even talking about basically immolating himself. Um, and, like basically saying that, oh, he got Claudia out, so he was just gonna wait to do it, but like he planned to maybe off himself in the sunshine or something, and like and he comes back to find that Lestat is like sort of seemingly talking about the world war, when in fact he's like, oh, and isn't it great that Claudia came home and that she's not gonna be in danger in Europe. And the reveal that she's sitting there and has not escaped or has been brought back is just crushing, right?
She looks very uncomfortable. We know something is wrong, and then we get that flashback
Yep.
to see exactly why.
Yeah.
And then we have the second chess match of the episode, where um she is talking to Louis about how the way to beat Lestat is to be him or to be like him and then think 5 steps forward. And
Yep.
while she's saying that, she's doing that in chess. And
Yep.
Lestat is still his outwardly, we don't know what he's thinking, but he's just mocking her, saying, like, oh, you're going to do that? How predictable, what an idiot you are, kind of stuff.
Yep.
Then she sets him up for checkmate, but then goes to bed without taking the king. I don't know. I don't feel like you have to take the king in checkmate. I feel like
No,
you just
I think you
you
just
can
you
end the
won.
game right there, right? But he's livid. He's like throwing the board around. He's yelling at her.
Very sore loser.
And meanwhile, Claudia has been saying, we're going to kill Lestat, and
Right.
we're going to do it. I thought that was an insanely good scene also. And Louis is not taking it all very well. I feel like he's not sure what to do.
Right. But he's also not talking about suicide anymore. So
I mean, I
there's
feel
that.
like the suicide thing was really, I mean, he does say I teased the daylight or something that day, but
Right.
he didn't really. He came home, it was still nighttime. Also in this episode, we've got the voodoo stuff on their front doorstep, which I
Oh
think is a
yeah,
fun
that's
little addition. Like a couple of times they come out and there's a voodoo doll and a little circle of salt or something in
yeah.
front of their, and people on the street are saying, "Don't look at them." So they're kind of they're in trouble, I feel like. So whatever's happening next has to happen, and then they have to bug out, which I believe is what
Right.
season 2 is going to be about.
Right. Right. Right.
But then we have a final scene in this episode in Dubai,
Yes.
where Malloy, who's also been getting his medication for Parkinson's in this episode, has passed out on the couch and is having a dream about 1970 whatever San Francisco,
Right.
where he meets Louis in this bar, and they kind of connect and
Hmm.
say, "I want to interview you. Whatever else happens, I'm cool."
Right.
Um,
Which implies a few different things,
a few
right?
different things, and then Rashid is there, and Louis is like, "Hey, do you want to come?" And Rashid's like, "No, you guys go ahead."
And
And then
Rashid gets very annoyed.
Daniel bolts awake. I mean, he looks like himself, like kind of,
Hmm.
yeah, but this this to me is not like evidence that Rashid was there so much as uh Daniel Malloy is having a drug dream
Oh yeah,
in
definitely.
his 70s or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So what did you think? Did you think that this was like Rashid was there the first time he met Louis?
I'm not sure. I don't think so because it doesn't necessarily play in. But maybe. I mean, Rashid clearly doesn't have the same human response to being fed on that other people do. Maybe Rashid's something else.
His
Um,
eyes are normal
yep. So he does not look like he's a vampire. So I
because
guess we'll
Bruce's
have to wait.
eyes were like orange, same
Yep.
as
Everybody else's.
Claudia's.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So that I think we're gonna have to wait and see. What I did think was, well, I thought that the interaction between Daniel and Louis was very interesting, and you kind of see where they started and how they met up. I thought that whoever they got to do this scene, it was a different actor, right? They didn't just
totally,
age him,
totally.
but they did a really good job at casting. Like the guy has his mannerisms down. It was really, I
It,
thought, well
yeah,
done on that front.
his speech was very close,
Yeah,
almost to the
yeah.
point where I was like, did they just loop in Bogosian here?
Yeah, right? Like it felt a little like that. So anyway, I liked that scene. I also thought that the one of the things that I think that the series does really well in terms of showing the different times that they're in is just impeccable like stylistic and costuming and hairstyles and things like that. So the suit that Louis is wearing here is like very like
Hmm.
very 70s. His hair is all done up
Hmm.
and it's even this interaction between him and Daniel. He's clearly reading Daniel's mind and says, I know like what trouble you're in and I can get you the good stuff. So obviously he knows that Daniel has an addiction issue, but he also is honest with him and tells him he's a vampire.
Right.
Kind of knowing that Daniel's not going to believe him, but Daniel kind of is like, well, we should just have an interview, right?
Yeah.
So that I thought was kind of a cool thing to see their dynamic then, and see what it has become. So I hope we see maybe a little bit more of the flashback. But we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, the Rashid thing is still a little bit of a mystery. I guess we'll find out more in the next episode.
Also,
But
what happened in this episode was Louis offers Malloy the gift because he's
yeah,
like, at this point, when we were first doing our interview, this is where you first asked me to make you a vampire. And
hmm,
Malloy's like, oh, I felt like you were wasting it. And Louis just like, I'll give it to you now.
yep,
Um, and now, but this time Malloy's like, what? So I can watch my daughter's divorce and die?
yeah,
No, give it to
interesting.
the rent boy. Speaking about Rashid, who's in the
Rashid,
room,
yeah,
who might actually be a vampire already.
yeah.
So I thought that was a very interesting exchange there too.
Right. And then there's also the other thing I think we forgot to mention is that when Lestat is bringing Claudia back, he specifically mentions what happened to her with
Yeah,
Bruce in more certain terms.
yeah.
And so I thought that that was kind of interesting. And it's really like not even a veiled threat that he's basically saying, you know, what do you think is out there in the world for you? And
And it could
uh,
happen again.
right. And it's interesting because it's not exactly like he's offering her a soothing and wonderful existence, right? Because he's pretty abusive himself. So it's interesting that he thinks that that is a better alternative for her, and that she would think it so. But it's
I don't
not
think
subtle
he's
threat.
offering her a better alternative at all. It's just
No,
like, you make Louis happy or I will kill you or
yeah,
destroy
yeah,
you or
yeah.
whatever, you
It's
know.
very It's very interesting. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to go back, but I just thought that that
No,
was
totally.
interesting that he invoked that specific thing, which obviously she's still like traumatized by.
Also, a huge reveal here is that Bruce is still alive. I kind of thought that she'd gotten the better of him and gotten
So
away
did
from
I.
him.
So
But
did
no,
I.
Bruce, he's just out there thinking of her frequently, is what Lestat
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
It's super creepy.
Yeah. Which, from somebody who's since she survived this assault, like one of the scariest things for an assault victim is to know that your person's still out there.
And he
But
can hear her thoughts
and he can hear
potentially.
her thoughts potentially, or not even just her thoughts, but I think that the threat that Lestat is kind of putting out there is that, oh, I can hear the thoughts. You could also imply that he could probably call Bruce to him too and
Mhm.
tell him where she is, which I thought was a bit of what he was trying to say to her.
Yeah, maybe.
So anyway, so I have a feeling he's going to pop up again, maybe. And then the other thing that popped up here is that Lestat also had another lover named Nikki, right? That he made a song for.
Right.
And so that was definitely something that was news to Louis. Um, and Claudia is definitely trying to erode um the relationship between Louis or the hold that Lestat has over Louis by basically saying, look, you're just another sort of pawn to him. Like you're no
Mm.
different than in what happened to Nikki and all this other stuff. So that I thought was other and again for the if you read the Vampire Lestat, Nikki is a specific character in there. Um, so we'll have to see if he pops up at some point.
So fascinating. So
Yep.
I'm like, I think it's not that hard to read. It's been a really interesting show so far. I'm
Yep.
really enjoying it. I'm kind of bummed that it's only 7 episodes. I wish they would, part of me wishes they would do the whole book, but I
I
mean,
know.
hopefully they'll get a chance to do more of it in a second season. I don't know if the show has been renewed.
Oh yes, so it has been. Yay. That's good.
Terrific.
So I would say that this is such a well done show that I was hoping that it would be. So I'm very glad to see that it was renewed. But I don't know when it will happen. So I don't know when they will be working on this for the next one. So um, my guess is probably if if they're really fast about it, maybe next fall. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty intense production, so with a lot of detail. So maybe I'm hoping that they already had the second season written, right? So maybe they can jump into it in the new year. So
Yeah.
very, very much hoping so. So I've really enjoyed this, and I can't wait to talk about the last episode to see where they wrap up.
Absolutely. Me too. So why don't we get back together and finish up this season next time we talk on Reanimated. HA, what do you think?
That sounds good. So go ahead, Stuart, because I never have it right.
So you can always email us at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. You can find all of our episodes on line at reanimated.podbean.com. Holler at us online in a few different ways. And in the meantime, we'll be back with more Interview with the Vampire again in about a week or so. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Indeed. Until next time, ciao and happy holidays, all.
Happy, happy.